We are extremely grateful to his benign presence, and I take the privilege to request Dr. Chandi Prasad Nandaji to kindly present his opening remarks.
Namaskar, Jai Jagannath, and good morning. Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Binesh Sahasrabuddheji, President, Indian Council of Cultural Relations. Esteemed guest of honor, Professor Shanti Dulpadi Pandit, Vice Chancellor, the prestigious Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Chanton Thui, Deputy Director, General Institute of Culture and Fine Arts, Royal Academy of Cambodia. Revered keynote speaker and a long-time acquaintance and whom I adore as one of the top intellectuals of this country, Professor Smriti Kumar Sarkar, former Vice Chancellor, Burdwan University, and my old colleague and also my, in many ways, my critical mentor, Professor Patita Pawan Mishra, former Professor, History, Sambalpur University, and convener of this conference, 3 days conference. And obviously, Dr. Upendra Padi, who doesn't need any introduction at this point of time. And I see him as one of the leading architects of this conference, without whom perhaps this moment to which we are speaking to would not have been possible. So it is Professor Padi. Distinguished guests, panelists, who would be joining the conference virtually in the upcoming sessions, delegates, attendees, members of print and digital media, ladies and gentlemen. So on behalf of Utkal University, Institute of Media Studies, and One Asia Foundation, I cordially welcome all of you to this historic, I emphasize historic, second edition of this 3-day international conference on Indian cultural heritage, which is called ICICH. And the theme, as you know, that is Kalinga, Southeast Asia Civilization Linkages, which is being organized for the next 2 days more, starting with today. So at the outset, I would also like to kindly draw your kind attention to the fact that the first international conference on Indian cultural heritage was organized in 2017, and this one today is 2023. So this is a gap of almost 6 years. And we are coming out of this pandemic phase. So I call this conference as historic, as it happening in the wake of post-pandemic times, and coincides particularly with a celebratory moment of India assuming G20 presidency, woven around a very interesting call for one earth, one family, and one future, to which Professor Padi was just now referring to. The conference is all about something which is premised around a futuristic call as a kind of, what I see that it's a kind of conceptual intervention. If you ask me what is the purpose and objective of this conference, so it's basically, I would see it as a kind of conceptual intervention to explore ways of recalibrating the global architecture and governance underlying the world order that we inhabit today. The theme as adopted for this conference is maybe intended as an entry point to reflect on the question at a discursive level, while engaging with the theme on a more critical empirical registers. So as you look at the plenary sessions, the themes of these sessions have been well tailored out, and the proposed deliberations of the conference, as you may note, are, as has been already spelled out by Professor Padi, on themes like historiography, India, Southeast Asia, and this idea of Indianization is the theory, the debate around Indianization thesis is going to be reflected on, debated, revisited, and contested. Maybe also, some more arguments come in favor of it to bolster this argument. Similarly, we have literature, folklore, monuments, and ports as evidence of cultural linkages, and there is an archaeological dimensions to it which needs to be also probed in. Trade and commerce in medieval modern India, obviously. Indian diaspora is another component, and most importantly also coming to the contemporary phase, as we engage with the question of look east policy, act east policy, so we also try to reflect on what could be the possibility of engaging with the ways of doing geopolitics today. If some of the thoughts gets pulled out of this conference, and how do we work on this, how do we build on these arguments to redefine or remap this idea of geopolitics for the present context. So as we can see that the varied range of relationships from these five plenary sessions up, you can see these broad themes and underlying this, there is a varied range of relationship between the people of Kalinga, the coastal region lying between Godavari and Mahanadi rivers, and obviously Southeast Asia, spanning over 2 millennia in a temporal scale, in a time scale, which has been richly documented. People doing history, anthropology, and also other forms of knowledge digging. When they look at these dimensions, they have empirically done a lot of research, a lot of ideas have been generated over the years on these questions. I mean, this looking at exploring the linkages between Kalinga and Southeast Asia. However, this relationship obviously arguably stretched beyond a very obvious traffic and commodity exchange to one that had deeper cultural and ideological orientations. This quintessential relationship was obviously, as you may remember, back in November 15th, 2022, from Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji made a very interesting reference to Katak Balijatra. So that reference, in fact, reinforced and evoked global appeal. Recently, when Modi ji, in this context of his participation in G20 summit at Bali, referred to this famous Balijatra that gets celebrated at Katak in Odisha as a great exemplar of thriving relationship between India and Indonesia. Perhaps I think this conference is coming out of that comment, that reference which was made, and maybe it was thought that it's interesting to get this whole idea again revisited from a different perspective, and if we can at least contribute to this thought structure in a different way. In fact, Balijatra commemorates this robust maritime history of Odisha and points to its trade and commercial engagement with Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka. Driven by the dynamics, as we today we get driven by the dynamics of globalization, and with hindsight, as we look back today in Kalinga, on Kalinga and India's profound historical, commercial, cultural connect with the world outside for more than 2,000 years, there are several issues which comes to trouble us, and there are questions about how to strategically rethink. I emphasize we need to strategically rethink India's relationship today with Asia, including China, because as you know that this country has a different hyper-real existence. It's a hyper-real Europe in 19th century or 20th century, but 21st century, we often we encounter China in a hyper-real state. So it is hyper-real China which needs to be engaged in what way. So this is why we need to strategically rethink India's relationship with Asia, Southeast Asia, and the world at large. Obviously, all these questions merit deeper scrutiny in the light of hegemonic dominance of countries like China. More so, the problematic includes the question as to what could be the possible domains of forging and rebuilding these connections: intellectual, cultural, ideological, or commercial, or the mix of it. So how we try to build on all these connections, how to rethink these connections. I think one of the major focus of this conference is going to particularly chase this particular sub-theme, some of these underlying themes. This is going to be the very most important focus of this conference. In fact, thinking through a theme like connected fast between India and Southeast Asia that informs the present we inhabit, and thereby configuring the dynamics of a time that was marked by an absence of discursive framework of modernity and its cognate concepts like civilization, politics, and nation states, perhaps tellingly call for a critical engagement of interplay of modes of representing parts, representing past, memory, and history. Because the theme that we are looking at is a theme both temporally and spatially, is something away from modernity, away from the idea of civilization which got coined in 19th century, or the whole discursive framework of what you call post-enlightenment laid idea of modernity, politics and nation states. It was not there. So how do we look at these time and this space, these geographies, with all its connections, without keeping this category in mind, that something which was absolutely significantly missing, and how do we make sense of that is the major challenge, I think, that our deliberations have to take note of that. Mapping some of the understudied yet very nuanced nature of such cultural encounters and conversations between these spatial entities based on historiographic perspectives becomes an inescapable cause for revisiting a theme like Kalinga and Southeast Asia linkages that has drawn, let me tell you, very serious interventionist scholarly attention over the period. Besides, as you know that the ASEAN, the 3 decades of ASEAN, back in 1992 and this is 2022, these 3 decades of ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations. How do we celebrate this moment of 3 decades? So this conference can be seen as making a review of 30 years of ASEAN in many ways. Coming from a platform like this, we also take into account that how do we engage with this question of ASEAN in terms of the idea and efforts at bolstering a trans-regional interactions between these zones in the wake of the end of Cold War provides the other key focus, but one of the seminal focus of this conference. The conference, as has been noted in the concept note, aims at foregrounding context and perspectives that were critical to the development and adaptations of Indian culture in Southeast Asia, propelled by diverse nature of interactions and syncretism in the indigenous society and vice versa. This is a very obvious theme. Nobody can get out of that, that cultural exchange when you try to map. But beyond that, there are some of the issues, some of the concerns which are tangentially, which will touch upon the core theme of the conference, namely, how have the cultural connections between Kalinga and Southeast Asia been reaffirmed and reimagined over time through pre-modern trade, art, architecture, and other forms of socio-cultural interactions. I think this is one of these very interesting dimensions that we need to also make sense of. The thematic gauge of the conference seeks to acknowledge the subtle sub-regional diversities that sought to articulate autonomy and agency within what is often folded into the category of homogeneous, unified Southeast Asian identity. So we try to contest this. Deliberations in many ways may also try to problematize this, whether there is a unified Southeast Asian identity or there are also diversities, pluralities within. We need to look at them, engage with them, and we need to recognize them, whether it is a homogeneous category or it is a heterogeneous category, whether we need to look at Southeast Asia as one bulk product or there are also components which we need to engage with differently. So, but at the same time, we recognize the disciplinary practices of exploring the history of Southeast Asia, quote unquote. History of Southeast Asia is homogeneous, but do we need to also contest this category? Need to question this category? These are the questions which we need also, the deliberations is going to look at. Southeast Asia, given its commonality underlying its parts in terms of its shared cultural markers, the claim to its geographical, ethnic, historical, linguistic, and political homogeneity has always been profoundly questioned and settled. Thus, it needs hardly any reiteration that ASEAN, as an entity like collective modern nation polities, illuminates thriving yet diverse socio-cultural and religious practices, even as it shares cultural values, historical links, challenges, and aspirations among its members as well as with India. So, broadly, it is in the fitness of this discourse. The conference aims at opening up ways of engaging with a dialogue that speaks to Kalinga and India's cultural interactions with different parts of Southeast Asia. So this conference is speaking to India and Kalinga's cultural interaction in many ways. So I once again welcome you to this historic meet. I call it historic meet. Maybe the numbers is going to increase as we pass on from this journey at this point of time. And I earnestly hope that the upcoming deliberations in the conference will be productively engaging, triggering off a wide range of perspectives and a lot many trenchant critics on the theme to the extent of raising more questions to think through than resolved standalone answers to take away. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
We are extremely thankful to Dr. Chandi Prasad Nanda, Professor School